I didn't want to do it at first, and they'd been after me to do one for about 2 years. And I thought, well, you know, there's going to be 22,000 people there, so we can throw in some new songs maybe and everything. But as it turned out, we didn't. We played all old songs, and they just sort of stared at us. And it was a strange experience, really. It was about 6 months ago.
Ricky Nelson was born on May 8, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey. From the very beginning, Ricky's life was different from other kids. His father, Ozzie Nelson, was a popular band leader, and his mother, Harriet Hilliard, was a well-known actress. Together, they already had a family show called The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, which was famous across America on the radio. This meant Ricky grew up in the world of entertainment. While other children were playing in the park or learning how to ride bikes, Ricky was spending time in recording studios and on movie sets. When he was just a small child, he was already surrounded by lights, cameras, and microphones. By the time Ricky turned 8 years old, he officially joined the family's radio show with his older brother David. Most kids that age were worried about school and playtime, but Ricky had already become a young star. Audiences loved his natural style of acting, and it didn't take long before he became a household name. His family then moved to Los Angeles in 1941 and bought a beautiful green and white house at 1822 Camino Palmero. This house was not just their home, it became a regular part of the show. It appeared on TV so many times that fans started driving by just to get a look at it. But inside those walls, life wasn't as perfect as it looked on screen. The house also served as a work studio. Scripts were written at the dining table, and rehearsals happened in the living room. It was like the family never stopped acting, even in real life. The Nelson family show became a big hit. In fact, it was so popular that the boys Ricky and David wanted to stop using actors to play their roles and take over the characters themselves. In 1949, both brothers officially became part of the show, playing themselves. This move was unusual because no other TV show had done it before. But the audience loved the idea of a real family acting as themselves on screen. Ricky wasn't just acting a part, he was living it. His real life was on TV for the world to see, and America couldn't get enough of it. But while the fame brought Ricky success, it also took away his chance at a normal childhood. There were no birthday parties with classmates, no school sports, teams, and no privacy. Ricky's life was always under the spotlight. His every move was watched, written about, and shared with millions of people. His asthma didn't help either. Ricky suffered from breathing problems, which kept him at home often and made it hard for him to enjoy outdoor activities like other kids. Despite these struggles, Ricky had a gift. He was talented in both acting and music. When he was 17 years old, he performed the song "I'm Walking" by Fats Domino on the family TV show. That one performance changed his life forever. Teenagers all over America went wild. The song became a major hit, selling more than 1 million copies. After that, Ricky was no longer just a TV star. He had become a music sensation. His fame doubled overnight. He began recording more songs, and his next single, "Bebop Baby," became another smash hit. It had 750,000 advance orders before it even reached stores, and sold over 1 million copies after release. Ricky's popularity kept growing, and soon he was everywhere on TV, on the radio, and in magazines. But fame came with pressure. His parents, who were also his managers and producers, wanted him to stay in control and remain the sweet, clean-cut boy America loved. They didn't like that Ricky was starting to rebel. He began having secret girlfriends, attending late-night parties, and dressing in a style that clashed with his family's image. He grew sideburns, slicked his hair back, and tried to act more independently. Ricky even had a romantic relationship with Marianne Gaba, a model and actress who played his girlfriend on TV. He gave her a ring that said, "To Marianne, love." Rick, she thought it was serious. But Ricky had already moved on to someone else. He was young, famous, and wanted to explore life on his own terms, but his family didn't like it. Ozzie, his father, controlled Ricky's money and gave him only a small allowance. Even though Ricky was making a lot of money from his music and acting, he wasn't allowed to spend it freely. His parents didn't want him to be spoiled or distracted by love. But Ricky wanted to grow up, and his quiet rebellion had already begun. By the late 1950s, Ricky Nelson had become one of the biggest teen stars in America. Thanks to his father's smart planning, Ricky's music career was tied directly to their TV show. At the end of many episodes, Ricky would perform a new song. Millions of people tuned in every week, which gave his music instant exposure. It was a brilliant marketing strategy. One of his biggest hits, Poor Little Fool, made history in 1958 by becoming the first song ever to top the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Between 1957 and 1962, Ricky had 20 songs in the top 40. Only Elvis Presley had more hits during that time. Ricky wasn't just a teen idol anymore. He had become a music legend. Ricky's fame spread worldwide. By 1960, he had more than 9,000 fan clubs around the globe. But Ricky didn't want to just follow orders. He wanted to create music on his own terms. When older musicians working with him refused to play in his rock and roll style, Ricky fired them and hired younger, more energetic players who believed in his sound. One of those musicians was James Burton, who later became a famous guitarist in his own right. Ricky was determined to have control over his music, even if it meant spending more money. He invested in better equipment, paid salaries to his band, and covered travel costs. These decisions helped him grow creatively, but they also drained his income. He was building a team and chasing his dream, but the bills were starting to pile up. Ricky also acted in movies. In 1959, he starred alongside John Wayne and Dean Martin in the Western film Rio Bravo. His performance was so good that he was nominated for a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. But the movie also showed something else: Ricky's love for luxury. He wore expensive suits, drove fancy cars, and became a regular in Hollywood's VIP clubs. His lifestyle was big and bold. Reports say he had a monthly allowance of $5,000, which would be worth around $50,000 today. He was living the high life, but at the same time, he was spending more than he earned. The success had brought money, but it also came with poor financial choices. In 1961, Ricky met a beautiful young woman named Chris Harmon. She came from a famous family. Her father was football star Tom Harmon, and her brother was actor Mark Harmon. On the surface, it looked like the perfect match. But things weren't as simple as they seemed. Chris and Ricky got married in 1963 because Chris was already pregnant. Her Catholic parents insisted on a quick wedding, and Ricky had to agree too. Raised their children in the Catholic faith, even though he wasn't Catholic himself. He went through religious classes and followed the rules, but it felt like he had no choice. What should have been a joyful celebration felt more like a forced agreement. The marriage faced problems right from the start. Chris was used to a rich and easy lifestyle, and she expected Ricky to provide that. But Ricky's income wasn't as strong as it used to be. His career had started to slow down. In 1964, when the Beatles arrived in America, the music scene changed completely. The British invasion brought a new sound that fans quickly embraced. Artists like Elvis and even Ricky struggled to keep up. Ricky released songs like For You, but they barely made it to the top of the charts. The magic was slipping away. Still, Ricky had some big wins. His 1961 hit Travelin' Man reached #1 on the charts and sold over 1 million copies. Its B-side, Hello Mary Lou, also became a hit. He had a great ear for music, even choosing songs that others, like Sam Cooke, had rejected. But even with musical success, his financial problems grew. Ricky's career was losing momentum, and his expenses kept growing. He had homes to maintain, band members to pay, and family responsibilities. Slowly but surely, Ricky was falling into debt. By the late 1970s, he was nearly broke. The fortune he had once earned from music and acting seemed to have disappeared. On December 31st, 1985, Ricky Nelson boarded a plane for a New Year's Eve concert in Dallas, Texas. Sadly, that flight would be his last. The plane crashed, and Ricky, along with several others, lost their lives. The news shook the world. Fans were heartbroken. The media began reporting that Ricky died without any money. They said his divorce had drained his bank account, and all he left behind were unpaid bills. It looked like his children would inherit nothing but problems, but that wasn't the full story. After his death, Ricky's brother found a hidden will that had never been used before. That will opened a new door. Lawyers started investigating Ricky's finances and discovered something shocking. For many years, record companies had been cheating Ricky out of his earnings. They had underpaid him for music sales, taken a bigger share of profits, and kept royalties that rightfully belonged to him. These weren't small mistakes. They were millions of dollars in lost income. Ricky's estate filed lawsuits against the companies involved, and the legal battle that followed uncovered how much he had really earned. The numbers were so high that even the judge couldn't believe it. Suddenly, the story of Ricky Nelson changed from one of sadness to one of surprise. Instead of being broke, Ricky had actually been a millionaire. He just didn't know it because others were taking his money. Once the lawsuits were settled, his children received large amounts of money. Tracy Gunner, Matthew, and Sam Nelson inherited a fortune. The family that thought they were left with nothing became wealthy almost overnight, but the story doesn't end there. One of Ricky's sons received nothing from the estate. The reason behind this is still unclear. Some believe it had to do with legal paperwork. Others say it was a personal decision. Whatever the truth, it became one of the most heartbreaking parts of the story. One son left out of the wealth, while the rest of the family became rich. It reminded everyone that fame, money, and legacy can sometimes be complicated in the end. Ricky Nelson's life was full of highs and lows. He started as a child star, became a teen idol, made music history, and lived a life most people only dream of. But he also faced personal pain, family struggles, and financial chaos. Despite everything, Ricky left behind something far more powerful than just money. He left a story of talent, sacrifice, control, rebellion, and redemption. And though the world once thought his legacy ended in a crash, the truth is, his music, his influence, and even his wealth lived on. His children now carry his name forward. They live with the memory of a father who gave his life to music and paid the price in silence. Ricky Nelson may be gone, but his story and a shocking fortune that followed will never be forgotten. Rick Nelson was one of America's most loved teen idols. He was born into a famous family and grew up under the spotlight thanks to the long-running TV show The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, which starred his real-life parents, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson. From a young age, Rick was surrounded by fame, cameras, and public attention. He quickly became a pop music star with hit songs that young people everywhere loved. Girls had posters of him on their walls, and families watched him every week on television. He had a clean image, a charming smile, and a musical style that made him a household name. Everything seemed perfect in his early life. Fame, money, and opportunities came easily, and many believed that Rick was on his way to becoming one of the biggest stars in the world. It was during this time that he met Chris Harmon, a beautiful and elegant young woman who came from a well-known Hollywood family. On the surface, they were the perfect match. He was a famous singer, and she came from wealth and glamour. Their wedding was a big event, full of cameras and celebrities. People thought it was a fairy tale coming to life. But behind the scenes, things were not as perfect as they looked. Rick had grown up with a father who taught him strict rules about money and responsibility. Ozzie Nelson ran the family business carefully and made sure his sons knew the value of every dollar. Chris, however, had a different outlook. Grown up in luxury and expected a life filled with expensive things. She wanted designer clothes, fancy homes, private schools for their children, and non-stop entertainment. Rick tried to keep up with her lifestyle, but he never said no. Instead of planning or budgeting, they just kept spending. When Rick's music career began to cool off in the 1970s, the bills kept piling up. Instead of slowing down, they hired more assistants, spent on vacations, and continued to live beyond their means. Chris wanted Rick to stay home more and be present, but Rick felt the pressure to tour and earn money. He was pulled in different directions as a husband, a father, and a performer. The stress began to build. They even tried to work together in showbiz again. Chris joined Rick on their family's TV show, playing herself, and for a while, it looked like things might get better. They starred in a movie called Love and Kisses, which was directed by Rick's father. The film was about a young couple who elope and live with the groom's parents. In real life, Rick and Chris were struggling with similar issues, and it showed. Critics weren't impressed, and behind the camera, their marriage was already falling apart. It was becoming harder and harder to separate their work from their personal pain. Rick wanted to grow as an artist and move away from his teen idol image. So in 1969, he started the Stone Canyon Band. He tried blending rock and country, a mix that was ahead of its time. He brought in talented musicians like Randy Meisner, who would later become part of the Eagles. But despite their skills, the band struggled financially. They played in small clubs for little pay, and the albums didn't sell. Rick was trying to reinvent himself while his fame slowly faded. In 1971, got a chance to perform at Madison Square Garden in a big rock concert. He wanted to show the world a new version of himself. He had dropped the Y from Ricky, hoping to leave the past behind. But when he performed new songs like Honky Tonk Women, the crowd didn't respond the way he hoped. Some people said the booing was due to problems in the audience, like police actions, but Rick took it personally. He believed the fans didn't want the new him, they only wanted the old image he had outgrown. He left the stage heartbroken. Eventually he returned and played his old hits, and the crowd cheered, but the damage was done. That night changed something in Rick. Still, he didn't give up. From the pain of that experience, he wrote Garden Party, a song that expressed his feelings. The main message was simple but powerful. You can't please everyone, so you gotta please yourself. The song became a hit and reached number 6 on the Billboard charts. It gave Rick a second chance, and fans started singing along again. But that success didn't last long. The music industry was changing fast, and Rick struggled to keep up. His following albums flopped, and his record label lost faith in him. He began performing at amusement parks and small venues just to make ends meet. His dreams of a big comeback seemed far away. As Rick's career slowed, his personal life started falling apart even more. His marriage to Chris was crumbling. The love that once brought them together had turned into arguments, stress, and distance. Rick was constantly on the road performing, night after night, just to cover the rising costs of their lavish lifestyle. Chris felt neglected, and Rick felt trapped. They both had different ideas of what family life should be. Their house, once filled with hopes and memories, became a place of tension and fights. Then, in 1977, after a long tour, Rick returned home to a shocking sight. He found his belongings moved out of the house, and Chris was inside a rental property. With 2 Los Angeles Rams cheerleaders, Rick was devastated and humiliated. The message was clear. Their marriage was over. Chris claimed she did it for the kids, saying Rick's alleged drug use had made him an unsafe father. Rick and his team denied those claims, but the emotional damage was deep. What followed was a brutal divorce. They tried to reconcile in 1980. Rick bought a mansion that once belonged to actor Errol Flynn, hoping for a new beginning. The house cost $750,000 money Rick didn't have, but he was trying to save what was left of their relationship. Unfortunately, the problems followed them to the new home. Chris wanted Rick to quit music and focus on acting, but Rick was drowning in debt. He needed to tour to survive financially. The mansion brought even more stress. Rumors said the house was haunted, the lights flickered, strange noises echoed through the halls, and peace never came. Instead of healing there, marriage, it deepened the cracks. Soon the divorce turned into a long, drawn-out court battle. Chris accused Rick of being a drug addict and unfit father. Rick claimed Chris had a drinking problem and left the kids to be raised by staff. The court fight dragged on for 5 years and cost over $1 million in legal fees. The kids were caught in the middle, watching their parents destroy each other in court. By the time the divorce was final in 1982, Rick was emotionally and financially drained. He was ordered to pay $4,000 a month in child support and got joint custody of their 4 children, Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam. But Rick was nearly broke. He kept touring, sometimes playing small shows and driving long hours just to stay afloat. The more he worked, the more tired he became. His health began to decline. His voice didn't have the same power, and the energy he once had on stage was fading, but he had no choice. Every concert meant keeping the lights on, paying for his kids' schools, and trying to protect what little was left of his legacy. He had dreams of a comeback, but by 1985 those dreams were barely holding together. One of Rick's biggest fears was flying. He'd always hated airplanes, but he didn't like buses either. He wanted to travel in private, so he bought a used 1944 Douglas. DC 234, $118,000. The plane had once belonged to Jerry Lee Lewis and looked like a piece of rock and roll history. But in reality, it was falling apart. The engines failed often. The parts were old and hard to replace. There were stories of the band pushing the plane by hand to get it moving. People close to Rick were afraid. His guitarist's wife begged him not to get on that plane. Bassist had already survived 2 emergency landings. Even his pianist Andy Chopin didn't want to fly. But Rick ignored the warnings. He needed the money and couldn't afford to cancel shows. In September 1985, the plane had engine trouble, and Rick missed a big performance. That loss was painful, but Rick pushed on. Then came December 31st, 1985. The band was flying to Dallas for a New Year's Eve show. The plane was delayed for hours due to more mechanical problems. Still, they boarded. Somewhere over Texas, thick smoke filled the cabin. The pilots couldn't see the instruments. The main pilot, Brad Rank, stuck his head out the window to fly the plane blind. At 5:14 p.m., the plane clipped some trees and exploded into a field near DeKalb. The wreckage was spread across 150 yards. The only survivors were the 2 pilots who escaped through the cockpit windows. Rick Nelson died in that crash at the age of 6. His fiancée Helen Blair was with him, along with 5 members of his band and crew, including sound technician Donald Clark Russell, pianist Andy Chopin, drummer Rick Enveld, guitarist Bobby Neal, and bassist Patrick Woodward. The crash was so horrible that autopsies were needed to identify the remains. The music world was shocked. One of America's most beloved pop stars was gone in an instant. Fans across the country mourned his loss. But what came next would reveal just how broken Rick's world really was. After Rick Nelson's tragic death, in the plane crash, what followed was not just mourning, it was chaos. Behind the grief was a massive legal mess. Rick, once one of the most famous teen idols in America, had left behind an estate filled with debt, broken relationships, and unanswered questions. At the time of his death, it was believed that Rick had no valid will. His ex-wife, Chris, claimed she couldn't find one and quickly moved to take control of the estate. She believed she and the children were entitled to whatever was left. But the situation was not that simple. Rick's brother David Nelson later came forward with a will dated just 4 months before the crash. This changed everything. According to the will, Rick left his entire estate to his 4 children, Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam, and named David as the executor. This meant that Chris, his ex-wife, and even his mother Harriet were completely left out. So was Helen Blair, Rick's fiancée, who had died with him in the crash. Suddenly, a fight over Rick's legacy began, not just in emotional terms, but in cold legal battles. Chris didn't take it quietly. She fought for a piece of Rick's life insurance policy and challenged David's authority in court. Then, even more surprising news hit the headlines. Rick had a 5th child, a son named Eric Jude Crew. He was the result of a short relationship Rick had with a woman named Georgianne Crew in 1980. Rick had at first denied paternity, but a court-ordered blood test in 1981 proved he was indeed the father. The court had ordered Rick to pay $400 a month in child support, which he reportedly stopped paying after a while. In Rick's final will, he wrote that paternity was still in dispute and excluded Eric completely. After Rick's death, Georgianne filed a lawsuit on behalf of her son, trying to secure a share of the estate, but the court upheld the will. Eric received nothing. Now, on top of the emotional trauma of losing their father, Rick's children were being dragged through a storm of lawsuits, claims, and financial confusion. Helen Blair's parents also filed a wrongful death lawsuit, claiming that the crash was due to poor maintenance and that they deserved compensation. Families of the other passengers on the doomed flight joined in. At the same time, creditors came forward with claims The estate owed over $1 million due to Rick's years of overspending, massive legal fees from the divorce, and the high cost of maintaining the aging DC-3 airplane that had ultimately cost him his life. Lawyers began circling. Every person who had been a part of Rick's past in life or business now wanted a piece of what was left. And yet, from the outside, it looked like there might not be anything worth fighting for. The estate was drowning in debt, the family was torn apart, and Rick's once shining star seemed dimmer than ever. But then, something unexpected happened.
Oh.
People realized that Rick's true fortune wasn't in cash, houses, or material things. It was in his music. Over his long career, Rick had recorded dozens of songs and built a catalog that spanned generations. In the digital age, this music had the potential to make millions through streaming, downloads, licensing, and more. But there was a problem. Record labels were quietly taking most of the money. In 2011, the Nelson estate, led by Rick's heirs, sued Capitol Records for between $100 and $250 million. The lawsuit claimed that Capitol had been hiding income by using vague accounting practices and reducing royalty payments. They accused Capitol of taking money from unmatched income funds that couldn't be directly linked to any artist and underpaying Rick's estate on digital sales. Even worse, Capitol was still applying old deductions meant for physical products, like broken vinyl records or damaged CDs, to digital downloads and streams. This didn't make sense. There were no broken digital files. The estate called it fraud and demanded justice. Capitol Records tried to defend their practices, but the pressure mounted. After years of back and forth, the case was settled in 2014. While the exact amount of money paid out wasn't made public, the estate won a major victory. Capitol agreed to more transparent reporting and better royalty payments going forward. It was a huge step for Rick's family. It opened the door for other artists' estates to take a closer look at their royalty statements. But it wasn't the end. In 2020, the Nelson estate filed another lawsuit, this time against Sony Music. The issue now was international streaming. The lawsuit claimed Sony was using a shady technique known as intercompany fees, where one office of Sony charged another for services, reducing the overall amount that reached Rick's estate. According to the legal team, up to 68% of some streaming royalties were gone before the family saw a single penny. For a musician like Rick, whose songs were still being played worldwide, this was a major loss. Sony decided to settle. This time, the outcome was more public. The Nelson estate received $12.7 million and secured a 36% increase in streaming royalties moving forward. After decades of financial struggle and legal heartbreak, Rick's children were finally beginning to see real income from the music their father had poured his heart and soul into. It was a bittersweet victory. The road had been long and painful. Rick had died young, feeling forgotten and financially ruined. His reputation had been battered by rumors, legal accusations, and years of struggle. But now his music was helping provide stability for his children and reintroducing his legacy to a new generation of fans. Rick Nelson's story is one of talent, tragedy, and timeless music. He was a young boy raised in the spotlight, a teen idol who tried to grow up in front of millions, a husband who fought to keep his family together, and a musician who wanted to evolve but was punished for it. He faced boos, bankruptcies, betrayal, and eventually, a fiery end that shocked the world. And yet, what he left behind is not faded. His songs still play, his voice still lives. And now, thanks to the efforts of his family and a hard-fought battle in courtrooms, his legacy is finally being respected. In the end, Rick Nelson's greatest lesson may have come from his own lyrics. You can't please everyone, so you gotta please yourself. Through all the ups and downs, he stayed true to who he was, a musician, a dreamer, and a man who never stopped trying to find his way.